Hornbostel Sachs. A Sachs Hornbostel is a system of musical instrument classification devised by Erich, Moritz van Hornbostel and Curt Sachs, and first published in the Zeitschrift für Ethnologie in 1914. An English translation was published in the Galpin Society Journal in 1961. It is the most widely used system for classifying musical instruments by ethnomusicologists and organologists. The system was updated in 2011 as part of the work of the Musical Instrument Museum's online project. Hornbostel and Sachs based their ideas on a system devised in the late 19th century by Victor Charles Mahillon, the curator of musical instruments at Brussels Conservatory. Mahillon divided instruments into four broad categories according to the nature of the sound-producing material: an air column, string, membrane, and body of the instrument. Mahillon limited his system, for the most part, to instruments used in European classical music. For this basis, Hornbostel and Sachs expanded Mahillon's system to make it possible to classify any instrument from any culture. Formally, the Hornbostel-Sachs is modeled on the Dewey Decimal Classification for libraries. It has 5 top-level classifications, with several levels below those, adding up to over 300 basic categories in all. The top 5 levels of the scheme are as follows: Idiophones. Idiophones. Sound is primarily produced by the actual body of the instrument vibrating, rather than a string, membrane, or column of air. In essence, this group includes all percussion instruments apart from drums, as well as some other instruments. In the Hornbostel-Sachs classification, idiophones are first categorized according to the method used to play the instrument. The result is 4 main categories: struck idiophones, plucked idiophones, friction idiophones, and blown idiophones. These groups are subsequently divided through various criteria. In many cases, these subcategories are split in singular specimens and sets of instruments. The latter category includes the xylophone, the marimba, the glockenspiel, and the glass harmonica. List of idiophones by Hornbostel-Sachs. Number. Struck idiophones. These idiophones are set in vibration by being struck, for example cymbals as xylophones. Directly struck idiophones. The player herself executes the movement of striking, whether by mechanical intermediate devices, beaters, keyboards, or by pulling ropes, etc. It is definitive that the player can apply clear, exact, individual strokes, and that the instrument itself is equipped for this kind of percussion. 111.1 Concussion idiophones are clappers. 2 or more complementary sonorous parts are struck against each other. 111.11 Concussion sticks are stick clappers. 111.12 Concussion plaques are plaque clappers. 111.13 Concussion troughs are trough clappers. 111.14 Concussion vessels are vessel clappers. 111.141 Castanets natural and hollowed-out vessel clappers. 111.142 Cymbals, vessel clappers with manufactured rim. 111.2 Percussion idiophones. The instrument is struck either with a non-sonorous object or against a non-sonorous object. 111.21 Percussion sticks. 111.211 Individual percussion sticks. 111.212 Sets of percussion sticks in a range of different pitches combined into one instrument. All xylophones, as long as the sounding components are not in 2 different planes. 111.22 Percussion plaques. 111.221 Individual percussion plaques. 111.222 Sets of percussion plaques, examples of the lithophone and also most metallophones. 111.23 Percussion tubes. 111.231 Individual percussion tubes. 111.232 sets of percussion tubes, 111.24 percussion vessels, 111.241 gongs. The vibration is strongest near the vertex. 111.241.1 individual gongs. 111.241.2 sets of gongs, 111.242 bells. The vibration is weakest near the vertex. 111.242.1 individual bells. 111.242.11 resting bells whose opening face is upward. 111.242.12 hanging bells suspended from the apex. 111.242.121 hanging bells without internal strikers. 111.242.122 hanging bells with internal strikers. 111.242.2 sets of bells or chimes. 111.242.21 sets of resting bells whose opening face is upward. 111.242.22 sets of hanging bells suspended from the apex. 111.242.221 sets of hanging bells without internal strikers. 111.242.222 sets of hanging bells with internal strikers. Indirectly struck idiophones. The player himself does not go through the movement of striking. Percussion results indirectly through some other movement by the player. 112.1 shaken idiophones or rattles. The player makes the shaking motion. 112.11 suspension rattles. Perforated idiophones are mounted together and shaken to strike against each other. 112.111 strung rattles. Rattling objects are strung in rows on a chord. 112.112 stick rattles. Rattling objects are strung on a bar or ring. 112.12 frame rattles. Rattling objects are attached to a carrier against which they strike. 112.121 pendant rattles. 112.122 sliding rattles. 112.13 vessel rattles. Rattling objects enclosed in a vessel strike against each other or against the walls of the vessel, or usually against both. 112.2 scraped idiophones. The player causes a scraping movement directly or indirectly. A non-sonorous object moves along the notched surface of a sonorous object, to be alternately lifted off the teeth and flicked against them, or an elastic sonorous object moves along the surface of a notched non-sonorous object to cause a series of impacts. This group must not be confused with that of friction idiophones. 112.21 scraped sticks. 112.211 scraped sticks without resonator. 112.212 scraped sticks with resonator. 112.22 scraped tubes. 112.23 scraped vessels. 112.24 scraped wheels. Cog rattles a ratchet. 112.3 split idiophones. Instruments in the shape of two springy arms connected at one end and touching at the other. The arms are forced apart by a little stick to jangle or vibrate on recoil. Plucked idiophones. Plucked idiophones. Idiophones set in vibration by being plucked. For example, the jaw harper mabira. This group is subdivided in the following two categories. In the form of a frame, the lamellae vibrate within a frame or hoop. 121.1 Clack Idiophones. A crickery. The lamella is carved in the surface of a fruit shell, which serves as resonator. 121.2 Gimbards and jaw harps. The lamella is mounted in a rod or plaque-shaped frame and depends on the player's mouth cavity for resonance. 121.21 Idioglot Gimbards. The lamella is of one substance with the frame of the instrument. 121.22 Heteroglot Gimbards. The lamella is attached to the frame. 121.221 Individual heteroglot gimbards. 121.222 Sets of heteroglot gimbards. In the form of a comb, the lamellae are tied to a border cut out from a board like the teeth of a comb. 122.1 with laced-on lamellae. 122.11 without resonator. 122.12 with resonator. 122.2 with cut-out lamellae. Musical box. Friction idiophones. Idiophones which are rubbed, for example the nail violin, about instrument with solid pieces of metal or wood rather than strings. Friction sticks. 131.1 Individual friction sticks. 131.2 Sets of friction sticks. 131.21 without direct friction. 131.22 with direct friction. Friction plaques. 132.1 Individual friction plaques. 132.2 Sets of friction plaques. Friction vessels. 133.1 Individual friction vessels. 133.2 Sets of friction vessels. Blown idiophones. Blown idiophones. Idiophones set in vibration by the movement of air, for example the Eol's clavier, an instrument consisting of several pieces of wood which vibrate when air is blown onto them by a set of bellows. The piano chanter features plaques. Blown sticks. 141.1 Individual blown sticks. 141.2 Sets of blown sticks. Blown plaques. 142.1 Individual blown plaques. 142.2 Sets of blown plaques. Unclassified idiophones. Membranophones. Membranophones. Sound is primarily produced by the vibration of a tightly stretched membrane. This group includes all drums and kazoos. List of membranophones by Hornbostel. Sachs. Number struck membranophones. Struck drums. Instruments which have a struck membrane. This includes most types of drum, such as the timpani and snare drum. Directly struck membranophones. Instruments in which the membrane is struck directly, such as through bare hands. Beaters are keyboards. 211.1 Instruments in which the body of the drum is dish or bowl shaped. 211.11 Single instruments. 211.12 Sets of instruments. 211.2 Instruments in which the body is tubular. 211.21 Instruments in which the body has the same diameter at the middle and end. 211.211 Instruments which have only one usable membrane. 211.211.1 Instruments in which the end without a membrane is open. 211.211.2 Instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed. 211.212 Instruments which have two usable membranes. 211.212.1 Single instruments. 211.212.2 Sets of instruments. 211.22 Instruments in which the body is barrel-shaped. 211.221 Instruments which have only one usable membrane. 211.221.1 Instruments in which the end without a membrane is open. 211.221.2 instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed, 211.222 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.222.1 single instruments, 211.222.2 sets of instruments, 211.23 instruments in which the body is double conical, 211.231 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.231.1 instruments in which the end without a membrane is open, 211.231.2 instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed, 211.232 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.232.1 single instruments, 211.232.2 sets of instruments, 211.24 instruments in which the body is hourglass-shaped, 211.241 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.241.1 instruments in which the end without a membrane is open, 211.241.2 instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed, 211.242 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.242.1 single instruments, 211.242.2 sets of instruments, 211.25 instruments in which the body is conical shaped, 211.251 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.251.1 instruments in which the end without a membrane is open, 211.251.2 instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed, 211.252 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.252.1 single instruments, 211.252.2 sets of instruments, 211.26 instruments in which the body is goblet-shaped, 211.261 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.261.1 instruments in which the end without a membrane is open, 211.261.2 instruments in which the end without a membrane is closed, 211.262 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.262.1 single instruments, 211.262.2 sets of instruments, 211.3 instruments in which the body depth is not greater than the radius of the membrane, 211.31 instruments which do not have a handle, 211.311 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.312 instruments which have two usable membranes, 211.32 instruments which have a handle, 211.321 instruments which have only one usable membrane, 211.322 instruments which have two usable membranes. Shaken membranophones, instruments which are shaken, the membrane being vibrated by objects inside the drum. Plucked membranophones, instruments with a string attached to the membrane, so that when the string is plucked, the membrane vibrates. Some commentators believe that instruments in this class ought instead to be regarded as chordophones. Friction membranophones, instruments in which the membrane vibrates as a result of friction. These are drums which are rubbed, rather than being struck. Friction drums with stick. Instruments in which the membrane is vibrated from a stick that is rubbed, used to rub the membrane. 231.1 Instruments in which the stick is inserted in a hole in the membrane. 231.11 Instruments in which the stick cannot be moved and is subject to rubbing, causing friction on the membrane. 231.12 Instruments in which the stick is semi-movable and can be used to rub the membrane. 231.13 Instruments in which the stick is freely movable and is used to rub the membrane. 231.2 Instruments in which the stick is tied upright to the membrane. Friction drum with cord. Instruments in which a cord attached to the membrane is rubbed. 232.1 Instruments in which the drum is held stationary while playing. 232.11 Instruments which have only one usable membrane. 232.12 Instruments which have two usable membranes. 232.2 Instruments in which the drum is twirled by a cord which rubs in a notch on the stick held by the player. Hand friction drums. Instruments in which the membrane is rubbed by hand singing membranes. This group includes kazoos, instruments which do not produce sound of their own, but modify other sounds by way of a vibrating membrane. Free kazoos. Instruments in which the membrane is vibrated by an unbroken column of wind, without a chamber tube. Vessel kazoos. Instruments in which the membrane is placed in a box, tube or other container. Unclassified membranophones. Chordophones. Sound is primarily produced by the vibration of a string of strings that are stretched between fixed points. This group includes all instruments generally called string instruments in the West, as well as many keyboard instruments, such as pianos and harpsichords. List of chordophones by Hornbostel. Sachs number. Simple chordophones are zithers, instruments which are in essence simply a string of strings and a string bearer. These instruments may have a resonator box, but removing it should not render the instrument unplayable. They include the piano therefore, as well as other kinds of zithers such as the koto and musical bows. Bar stick zithers. The string bearer is bar-shaped. 311.1 Musical bows. The string bearer is flexible. 311.11 Idiophones. Musical bows. The string is cut from the bark of the cane, remaining attached at each end. 311.111 Monoidiophones. Musical bows, containing one string only. 311.112 Polyidiophones. Musical bows are harp bows, containing several strings that pass over some type of bridge. 311.12 Heterochord. Musical bows. The string is of separate material from the bearer. 311.121 Monoheterochord. Musical bows. The bow has one heterochord string only. 311.121.1 Without resonator. 311.121.11 Without tuning noose. 311.121.12 With tuning noose. 311.121.2 with resonator. 311.121.21 with independent resonator. 311.121.22 with resonator attached. 311.121.221 without tuning noose. 311.121.222 with tuning noose. 311.122 Polyheterochord. Musical bows. The bow has several heterochord strings. 311.122.1 without tuning noose. 311.122.2 with tuning noose, 311.2 stick zithers, with rigid string carrier, 311.21 musical bow stick. The string carrier has one rigid and one flexible end. 311.22 true stick zithers. NB round sticks which happen to be hollow by chance do not belong on this account to the tube zithers, but are round bar zithers. However, instruments in which a tubular cavity is employed as a true resonator, like the modern Mexican harper, are tube zithers. 311.221 with one resonator good. 311.222 with several resonator goods. Tube zithers. The string bearer is a vaulted surface. 312.1 whole tube zithers. The string carrier is a complete tube. 312.11 idiochord tube zithers. 312.12 heterochord tube zithers. 312.121 without extra resonator. 312.122 with extra resonator. 312.2 half tube zithers. The strings are stretched along the convex surface of a gutter. 312.21 idiochord half tube zithers. 312.22 heterochord half tube zithers. Raft zithers. The string bearer is composed of canes tied together in the manner of a raft. 313.1 idiochord raft zithers. 313.2 heterochord raft zithers. Board zithers. The string bearer is a board. 314.1 true board zithers. 314.11 without resonator. 314.12 with resonator. 314.121 with resonator bowl. 314.122 with resonator box. The piano is part of this subdivision. 314.2 board zither variations. 314.21 ground zithers. 314.22 harp zithers. Trough zithers. The strings are stretched across the mouth of a trough. 315.1 without resonator. 315.2 with resonator. Frame zithers. The strings are stretched across an open frame. 316.1 without resonator. 316.2 with resonator. Composite chordophones. Acoustic and electroacoustic instruments which have a resonator as an integral part of the instrument, and solid-body electric chordophones. This includes most Western string instruments, including lutes such as violins and guitars, and harps. Lutes. The plane of the strings runs parallel with the resonator's surface. 321.1 bow lutes. Each string has its own flexible carrier. 321.2 yoke lutes. Lyres. The strings are attached to a yoke which lies in the same plane as the sound table and consists of two arms and a crossbar. 321.21 bull lyre. 321.22 box lyres. 321.3 handle lutes. The string bearer is a plain handle. 321.31 spike lutes. 321.311 spike bow lutes. 321.312 spike box lutes. 321.313 spike tube lutes. 321.32 neck lutes. 321.321 neck bowl lute, mandolin, balalaika, etc. 321.322 neck box lutes, guitar, violin, etc. Harps. The plane of the strings lies perpendicular to the resonator's surface. 322.1 open harps. The harp has no pillar. 322.11 arched harps. 322.12 angular harps, 322.2 frame harps. The harp has a pillar 322.21 without tuning mechanism. 322.211 diatonic frame harps, 322.212 chromatic frame harps, 322.212.1 with all strings in one plane. Inline chromatic harp 322.212.2 with strings in two planes crossing each other. Cross-strung harp 322.22 with tuning action. 322.221 with manual tuning action. Lever harp 322.222 with pedal action. Pedal harp. Harp lutes. The plane of the strings lies at right angles to the sound table. A line joining the lower ends of the strings would be perpendicular to the neck. Notched bridge unclassified chordophones.